Assalamualaikum, selamat petang, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I am Shareena and I will be your moderator for this evening. This is part of a series of study sessions organized by Sisters in Islam. Today we have some of you participants on Zoom as well as on our Facebook. So welcome again. Let's just start the session. The Iranian Revolution began as a mass protest against the regime of the Shah, which became increasingly corrupt, oppressive, and brutal. The regime of the Shah of Iran was equated to autocratic repression, uncontrolled opulence, whilst the ordinary Iranians struggled in poverty. There was also an aggressive move towards modernization and westernization, the so-called White Revolution. At the time of the revolution, there was a strong anti-West, anti-American sentiment within the population. The politics behind the revolution goes well beyond Iran, with heavy involvement from Western imperial powers, which further exacerbated distrust towards the monarchy. The most important resource of the country, oil, was in the hands of the British, and the population was deprived of the wealth it generated. Importantly, the White Revolution transformed Iran from a feudal economy to a capitalist economy, and with this eroded the powers of the landowners and the clergy. The people were losing their way of life, and at the same time, the peasant population were not enjoying greater wealth and progress. The fiercely nationalist Prime Minister Mossadegh made it his mission to nationalize Iran's oil and was increasingly becoming a threat to British power in Iran. A coup led to the removal of Mossadegh, but the seeds of revolution had been sowed. Political opposition, both nationalists and those also connected to Russia and communism, was responded to with harsh crackdowns, instilling an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. As OPEC increased oil prices, the Shah's relationship with the West also began to be strained. So within this environment, the people started to turn to an enigmatic leader, fiercely nationalistic, an uncompromising critique of the Shah's regime, and bound to local culturalism, and importantly, revered as a holy man, the Grand Ayatollah Khomeini. I'm trying to paint a picture that at the beginning, the Iranian Revolution germinated as a nationalist movement from a highly discontented, volatile society. The revolution was for liberty from the monarchy. There was never a specific or a targeted intention transition from secularism to an Islamic state. The revolution was from the middle class, the working class, the clergy, and also, importantly, from the women themselves. The revolutionary forces under the Grand Ayatollah Khomeini forced the Shah into exile. The government of the Shah, which has over 2 centuries ruled as a monarchy, ended in January 1979, and a new Islamic order was established in April the same year. So that is briefly, very briefly, leaving out a lot of details in terms of the beginning of the revolution. But why are we talking about Iran and the Iranian Revolution today? The Iranian Revolution is considered by many scholars as the most consequential revolution in modern history. It cannot be doubted that Iran is one of the major players that have shaped global politics as we know today. It also cannot be doubted that the birth of the idea of an Islamic state and the idea of a return to the source of Islam is also a philosophy popularized by the Islamic Republic regime in Iran. Virtually everything that has happened in the Middle East until today can some way or other be traced back to the Iranian Revolution, the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, the Iran-Iraq war, the creation of the Hezbollah ISIS, all have some links to the events of the Iranian Revolution. And what has impacted us most is the immediate response of the Sunni Muslim countries in the Middle East, which began its own brand of Islamic propaganda and Islamic radicalism in order to maintain leadership within the Islamic global world order. And that has been exported to Muslim countries globally. So today, we will be hearing about the ripple effects of the revolution in our region and specifically in Malaysia. We have with us to speak to us about this Aizat Shamsuddin. He is an analyst and practitioner in the prevention of extremism, good governance, and human rights. And since 2015, he is the founder and project coordinator of Community Muslim Universal, which was founded by former radicalized youth to counter extremism with counter narratives. In recognition of his work in peace and human rights, he received an Australia Award scholarship from the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and ASEAN in 2018. Then he completed his master's degree, specializing in counterterrorism, conflict studies, and political Islam from the University of Melbourne in 2020. As part of his global network in counter-extremism initiatives, he is an alumnus of the German Institute for Foreign Cultural Relations and American Council of Young Political Leaders since 2018. Aizat is also trained in Sharia and law for 5 years at the Islamic Science University of Malaysia. His passion is to make the world a better place. Welcome, Aizat.
Hi, Shareena. Assalamualaikum.
Hi, welcome and thank you for being us tonight and speaking to us about this very important development, although it was many decades ago. So Aizat will be presenting for about between half an hour to 45 minutes. And after that, so save all your questions for after his presentation. I think he has a PowerPoint for us. You can ask questions either by putting your hands up. You can ask questions in person, or you can also ask through the chat. So as Aizat goes along, please post your questions in the chat box, or jot it down somewhere so you can ask it later. So I'll hand it over to you, Aizat. Please go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to Shareena as the moderator today for introducing us to the topic today. I think that's a very sufficient introduction. I think that already presents what I'm going to present today about Iranian Revolution. But I'm here to speak specifically on what are the impacts on Malaysian politics. But anyway, thank you also Sisters in Islam for having me, and thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope this is, please regard this as a sharing session. We can discuss this later after my presentation. If you have any points, comments, or even disagreement with some of the points that I will be making, so don't feel hesitate to do that. You can just put your comments and ask me right away. So basically, I have a presentation prepared, presentation slide, but let me put this up. All right, can you guys see the slides? Yep, okay. So basically, today I'm gonna. This is like Shareena said. This event has been. It happened like decades ago. So I have to look up, at many research materials in 1979 to relate to some of the impacts that we have faced in 1980s in Malaysia. So I mean, I was born in 1990s, so this is quite a difficult task. But then what I'm gonna present today, it's about further impacts of the Iranian Revolution. Even we can relate that the impacts until today in the 21st century. So basically, Iranian Revolution, like Shareena has mentioned, is one of the remarkable revolutions. It's people's revolutions in the middle of Cold War in 1980s or in late 1970s, where in late 1970s the world is dominated by two superpowers, Soviet Union and also United States. So suddenly there's one country, when other countries like former Soviet Union states who were battling, against for freedom, for liberation against the Soviet occupation, or to have free states, self-determination. But then there's one state in the Middle East, depends on your politics. There's one state in the Middle East that suddenly came up in late 1970s with a new revolution that is not Marxist oriented or socialist oriented, but then it's Islamic oriented kind of revolution. So that's what makes this revolution is so remarkable, and especially in how it has given a lot of impacts to the Muslim world. So this is how I'm trying to relate, how I'm trying to link Iranian Revolution to Malaysia. So Iranian Revolution that I will explain later from this graphic has contributed to especially in terms of ideological interpretation, ideological movement in Malaysia. So there are many factors under it or drivers under it that I will explain later. But so far, what you have to understand in the first instance is that the impacts are related to the ideological movement of during 1979 Iranian Revolution. All right. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you guys to the background, some of the backgrounds of why Iranian Revolution happened in the first place. So what Sherry has mentioned just now, I have classified the drivers of 1979 Iranian Revolution into three main drivers. So like any revolution happened because of socio-economic issue, bread and butter issue. So during the Shah Reza Pahlavi government, there was an overproduction of university graduates, but then there's no jobs. So and then mechanization of in industry, especially farming, that displaced farmers, more traditional farmers, so they couldn't cope with the situation, with more high tech industry, and then there's an increase of unemployment and urban poverty, especially in Tehran. Tehran is one of the populated cities during that time and also now. So this is despite of economic growth from the oil revenues. So people are dissatisfied with the Shah government because why we do not get any benefits from the oil, from the growth of the economy when where you have been building with the British, like national oil company. This industry has been huge, and there's no economic impact on the ground. So people still suffer from this socio-economic hardship. Second is why people participated in this revolution. Why this revolution happened is because government autocracy. So autocracy under the Shah Reza Pahlavi was terrible. When he abolished two-party system, Iran used to have two-party system or democratic system, even especially during, this is very not many people know this, but then Iran used to have government under Prime Minister Mossadegh in 1950s, but then he was toppled, and then with the assistance of the US. I mean, this information has been declassified by CIA later in the later years. And then under Reza Pahlavi, there's a lot of censorship, arrest, torture, against dissidents, including the Islamist groups or Islamist scholars at the time. So because of this, it caused a lot of grievances, or also dissatisfaction among the people, where they cannot speak out against the autocratic government. And lastly, ideological movements against autocratic government in 21st century. So this is very important to note that in Iran, it's not during the revolution. It's not only the Islamist party that stood up against Ayatollah, against the Shah, but also other social or political movements like liberals, different kinds of ideologies like communists and Marxists. But then Islamist political movement took over, and then has had the upper hand to control, to create the new state of Islamic Republic of Iran. So, for example, yes. So here, I will explain to you what gave Islamist groups the upper hand that led to the success of political Islam in Iran. So there are 5 things that contributed to the success of Ayatollah-led revolution. So, as you know, this revolution is was led by Ayatollah Khomeini. There are 5 salient features that I've put up here, and then this is all based on multiple research. Journals and writings. So number 1 is ideology for the oppressed. So a lot of this ideology where you want to create a revolution, right? If you see revolution in Arab uprising, recently in 2010, 2011, the same narrative that is appealing to a lot of people is that this revolution is for you, is for the oppressed, to have more rights, to have more, to give more identity to you. So, but then the uniqueness, the unique feature of Iranian Revolution or political Islam led by Ayatollah Khomeini is the connection of faith and social justice embedded in Shia Islam. So it's not just only about the old history between, the appointment of Islamic Caliph after the demise of Prophet Muhammad. It's not just about that, but it's also about the oppression of Shia community in other Muslim majority countries. So this is and also under this ideology, Ayatollah Khomeini kind of promised to the people that, this is what we're going to have is an Islamic Shia state, or, if you want to put the adjective there, it's an Islamic Shia state. And then Ayatollah himself was a figure of people who have been oppressed by Shah regime. So he was a political dissident in exile. He also a loud critic against the Shah. He wrote a lot of writings, especially if you see the book that I've put on the right. He wrote the book in 1970s, if I'm not mistaken. So from Qom, Iraq, and from Najaf, and later from Paris. So how he spoke up against Shah. It shows like how this kind of ideology, was alive. Even though he was in exile. Second feature is the doctrine of Wilayatul Faqih. So this doctrine is a very famous doctrine. This doctrine, or we call this as Khomeinism. So what does it mean by Wilayatul Faqih? It's a cleric should have the ultimate authority because he is more knowledgeable than anyone above law, about law and justice. So this doctrine basically gives the ulama, the clerics, the power, the political and also the religious power to govern a country. So later, after the revolution, the clergy, Khomeini, conducted a referendum in 1979, asking the people about what is your opinion about creating an Islamic Republic of Iran, and nearly 99% of the people said yes. So there are a lot of factors that contributed to this answer, but then this is a bit of context to that. And then number 4, Ayatollah Khomeini's leadership. So in ideology, right? So it's not just about the ideas in the ideology, but also the persona or the figures in the ideology. Ayatollah Khomeini is a scholar, is an Islamic scholar. He wrote about fiqh, he wrote about or jurisprudence, he wrote about a lot of things, including politics, and he has such a good oratory skill. It's not like Hitler, very like affirmative, so on and so forth. But then he's very calm. He's very good at communicating and delivering his ideas to the masses. And also his appearance to the public, right? His personality of piety and zuhud are very attractive to a lot of people, especially religious people. Now we can relate to that, where people see, people in Juba, in religious garments, in any religion, people would regard these people as a highly, respectable people. So this also contributed to the upper hand or success of mobilizing, especially the people, to support the revolution. And then the last one is the organized clergy network. So I think this is very important part, where you have ideas and also you have leadership already, but then you need to spread or disseminate the ideology. So what happened is that although Ayatollah Khomeini was in exile in Najaf, Qom, and Paris, he utilized his connection to community leaders and mosques in Iran to disseminate his ideas, as you can see in the last point there. And how these groups operated. They smuggled letters, cassette tapes. During that time, there was no social media yet. Internet was not popular, very limited. And then they spread these ideas through underground network of mosques and also seminaries. So this combination of salient features build up to the revolutions, a social and political mobilization that gave the upper hand to the Islamist group. So this is one of the books that I found on social media. I mean, this is very funny. Ayatollah Khomeini's Mein Kampf. So it's like it's basically the political ideology of Ayatollah Khomeini that he has written in his book. So it's similar to what Hitler's done, in the past. So yeah. So after the revolution, basically Shah Reza left Iran. Ayatollah returned to Iran. The total number of deaths amounted to 2,700. According to revolutions record, 2,700 is not a lot. But then, a lot of revolution, like Cultural Revolution in China, thousands of people died because of the revolution. But then it's still a significant amount of death here. How people struggled to fight against Shah, and also to fight against Ayatollah Khomeini as well. So after the revolution, the Shah, the Ayatollah Khomeini came back to Iran, and then he established his public relations. He declared to newspaper that now I'm back, I will rule the country. So what happened after that, the expansion of Wilayatul Faqih. So Wilayatul Faqih was not only a theory anymore. Now Wilayatul Faqih has been put into implementation, into governance, where it was enshrined into the Iranian constitution, and Khomeini was declared as as the supreme leader until his death in 1989. So what is supreme leader? Supreme leader is the highest religious and political authority. Iran still has a supreme leader until today. He has the power to choose candidates from presidential election, appoint the Guardian Council. We will look at some of the graphics to see the structure of governance in Iran. And then after the death of Ayatollah Khomeini, absolute Wilayatul Faqih was introduced through 1989 constitutional amendment. So here it expanded the scope of supreme leader's power on all organs of the state, and also it removes some of the requirements there, from marja'. So the criteria to be supreme leader was supposed to be marja' taqlid, the most senior rank in Shia clergy, but then they removed that to allow mid-ranking cleric like Khomeini to assume the same role, because he doesn't fit in that marja' taqlid. So I want to show you a bit of a video to show you the return of Ayatollah Khomeini to Iran and how people celebrated his return.
He said that even if he were, he expected either to be assassinated or to lead his country. But at 10 minutes to 10, Khomeini was being helped down the steps of his chartered Air France jet to set foot on Iranian ground for the first time in 15 years. His first moments were uncomfortable ones, became increasingly nervous. Khomeini's name was the rallying cry that brought down the Shah, and now to his followers waiting outside the airport, he's the implacable opponent of Dr. Bastiar's government. The people were in a frenzy to catch just a glimpse of the man they revere like a god. They clawed and clambered and ran to see and be near him for 15 miles, and no more than a tiny fraction of the multitude succeeded. Marshals had volunteered to help keep the crowds back. Their job was impossible. The immense swell of support for Khomeini makes his fully understand his plans for an Islamic Republic. Most see it in simple terms, as a permanent end to the Shah and a return to some ancient idea of justice. But today his followers were cheering more than an idea. They were welcoming an old man they believe is capable of anything. Derek Taylor, News at 1, Tehran.
All right. So this is Iran political system, the structure. So you can see a supreme leader can appoint president through Guardian of Council, and basically, supreme leader, if you can see the organs of the government, like military, he controls military, he controls mosques, judicial system, and also media in Iran. All right. So after revolution, right? What happened? Still on the expansion of after the revolution, how law on mandatory veil for women introduced. Ayatollah Khomeini decreed that all women had to wear a veil, regardless of religion or nationality. So you can see on the right how women on that, before the referendum that I mentioned before, to vote on the Islamic Republic of Iran, women protested against this new law. And after revolution, what happened? Iran has become an important international political actor. So Iran has increasingly participated in many wars, and at the same time, because of its rebellious and also against anti-American and anti Saudi, so on and so forth. So it becomes a threat to the West and also the Gulf states. If you know some of the history, Iran-Iraq war, and how Iran has supported and funded a lot of wars in the Middle East, especially in Palestine, against Israel. And then it established, the most significant military organ in the world. Here is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and also Hezbollah to protect the revolution. So we can talk more about this later. And then also Iran actively exported wilayah Tulfake to other Muslim countries, especially neighboring countries, Shia, especially that has Shia population through da'wah and also revolution. So you can see the difference on the right in the picture, where before and after the revolution, where women have to wear veil in public. All right. And then what happened after that is increased authoritarianism, monopoly of the ulama and Islamist revolutionaries. So what happened after that is basically what they used to oppose, autocratic government under the Shah, human rights abuses, censorship against political dissidents. Also, this is also what they did, Ayatollah Khomeini did during his tenure as a supreme leader. So they shut down political opponents. They censored a lot of secular academics and arrest them and then put them in jail. And some of the reasons is because of the deviant reason. So this is part of the Islamic governance, right, where it's rule based on God's teaching. So but then it's very contentious, where deviancy is often interpreted by the state, where the state comprises of the men themselves. So it's really about political motivation while they're interpreting who's deviant and who's not. And yes, non-Islamist political parties and movements were banned. And today, throughout, decades after the revolution, Iran is one of the worst, has the worst records of human rights. How Iran stifles free press and women's rights. And also Iran, after the revolution, suffered a lot from brain drain, especially among women, female population, because it's recorded in OECD, and it's one of the worst countries that suffer from brain drain. A lot of these people or Iranians migrated out of Iran, and these people are very high skilled labor, very educated, and then they migrated to second country like this United States and also Europe. So it's such a waste for a country that has a lot of talents. So this is the repercussion of after Islamic Republic of Iran established. All right. So now we've come to the second part. How do I link this to the impacts of the revolution on Malaysian politics in 1980s? So in any revolution, revolutions can be contagious. So it can be a trigger point or factor to spark popular uprisings, strikes, demonstration, riots, social movements, so on and so forth. So this revolution is triggered because it's about the people. It's about against injustices and autocracies of the government. So, but as other than that, the revolution, especially Iranian Revolution, has has identity politics in it, which, you know, Muslim politics, where it's not just about you know, being free with you know, being propagating liberation of the oppressed, but from the colonizer or from the monarchy, but also to achieve something else, which relates to your faith, that is, you know, as a Muslim, right? And it gives you the spirit to, you know, to believe in the ideology, to join the revolution. And when we talk about political Islam serves as a basis for political identity and action. So so it's not just about political Islam. It's not just about idea where you believe in God, believe in Rukun Iman, Rukun Islam, but also striving for an Islamic state, to act upon it, to have a you know, a system, governing system that is inspired by this you know, religious beliefs or virtues. And Iranian Revolution marked the Islamic resurgence in 20th century, which Muslims worldwide seek to strengthen their understanding. So in 20th century, a lot of Islamist movement in this time, in 1980s or in 1970s, have failed, especially Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and also in other Muslim states, you know, in their struggle against the secular regime and also against injustices. But then what Iranian Revolution has done is to you know, inspiring thing about Iranian Revolution is that they have succeeded in their revolution. So it's inspired a lot of Islamist movement to draw their activism, their movement from Iranian Revolution. So including in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines, dissident Islamist parties and also movements openly supported the Iranian Revolution and its underlying principles. So although it's Shia state, or, you know, Iranian Persian state, but then it doesn't matter because the underlying principles behind the revolution is about, you know, it's Islamic, it's religious. So that's the main idea of the revolution. It's not really sectarian in nature, but then it's about ummah. It's about that. I will explain later in the next slide. All right. So to me, I see how Iranian Revolution impacted Malaysia through ideological inspiration. So it inspires people and movements who share the same political views. It sparks conversations and also inspiration to act upon it. I mean, there are two things about ideological inspiration. Number one, here is ideological appeal of the revolution. Political Islam offers the combination of religious and political struggles. So it's not only about political struggles, but also it's religious in nature. And also here, solidarity and the pride of Muslim Ummah. So this is a global concept where we have been hearing for the past, you know, years about a Muslim Ummah. You know, to have a global, to have a solid, to stand together as a Muslims. You know, Muslim Brotherhood. So Iranian Revolution is Persian, and also it's republic in nature. So this is where the dilemma or the contentious part where for Islamists in Malaysia, where how do they want to take Iranian Revolution as an inspiration, because you know, Iranian Revolution is it's a republic. So in Malaysia, it's like we have monarchy, you know, so on and so forth. So it's quite a challenge here, and then also it's a Shia you know, driven revolution. So it's a challenge. But then for a lot of Islamist movements, the most important part of the movement is about Muslim Ummah. You know, you have the sectarian beliefs differences, Sunni and Shia, and others, but then it's not a core problem here. So the spirit of political movement is more important than this sectarian differences. And then the second thing is the ideological success of this. So it inspires a lot of movements to do the same, where to establish Islamic government and also state. In Malaysia, in the later slides, I will explain further, but for example, especially PAS as a political party, Islamist political party, opposition party at the time, has embraced this inspiration to establish Islamic government and also state, which they did to a certain extent in Kelantan and also within their own party that we will further explore. And the success also marks not only Muslim success, but also the success is about against the enemies, the West and also communism, where the West is, in Europe, it's very rapid secularization or aggressive secularization of the country shows that this country is not really friendly to Muslims, and also communism itself as an ideology that is anti-religion. So from all these ideological inspiration, it comes to the conclusion where Islamist movements in Malaysia think that Islamic political Islam is a feasible or is a viable alternative for the country, to govern the country. So, and Iran is the example of that. Okay. I think I've come to to the final parts of my presentation. So this is the crucial part of the presentation: how it impacted Malaysian politics in 1980s specifically. So if some of you familiar faces, I think you guys have, some of you are familiar with political Islam in Malaysia. And to know more about this, I think Farish Noor has written a very good book on this topic. So how it impacted Malaysian politics in 1980s. So number one is the adoption of Islamic government or Wilayatul Faqih. Drawing from that inspiration of Iranian Revolution. So it inspired especially politicians in PAS as an Islamist opposition party. In 1980s, 1979 is the Iranian Revolution, and then after that, the spillover effect of the revolution. You see the takeover of ulama faction in PAS. So before that, it was PAS was led by Asri Muda. He was a very Malay nationalist. He worked with UMNO before he could work with UMNO. So a lot of and that partnership with UMNO has caused PAS a lot of troubles, and also loss during general election, and also support from their own supporters. So that's also led to the change of leadership, which is the takeover of ulama faction in PAS. So where people like Hadi Awang, Nick Aziz, and other politicians were part of this takeover. And Yusuf Rawal was then replaced Asri Muda at the time, and then he brought in a lot of more radical or more hardline approach to Islam. And also you can see from in the adoption of this Islamic government, PAS has established Shura Ulama Council, has established the position of spiritual leader. So if we have look at the supreme leader just now, so this is like, it's not exactly the same in terms of how, the jurisdiction, the power of this position, but then it's, a reflection of that spirit of Iranian Revolution. Also, Unit Amal in 1991. How the inspiration coming from the military organs of Iranian Revolution. So it's, I mean, this is to have an independent also, but then independent military, independent volunteer group. Unit Amma is like that, helping people, welfare, so on and so forth. But then in uniform, they have their own uniform. So this is reforms that has been done by PAS during 1980s. Right. And then more hardline approach to Islam, like I said, Yusuf Rawa, especially the PAS leader at the time, introduced a lot of hardline approach to Islam, including Islamic State, and brought in a lot of contentious perspective of governance at the time that we will explore later, I guess, in the next slide. And then also, this is also an important part where it has changed PAS from domestic political party, domestic political actor, to more active international political actor. So I've mentioned before how it has changed Iran to become an international political actor, but then here PAS has become an important political player in the Muslim world, especially, and then they joined. They played a role during OIC processes, and also they spoke a lot about in response to a Muslim plight in the Muslim or non-Muslim states where there's a discrimination against Muslims. They would speak up against that, so on and so forth. So you see this Muslim Ummah spirit has culminated in the political party or PAS itself. And secondly, is about popularization of Islamic State. So before Islamic State was not really, popular, but then because of Iranian Revolution, it sparked discourse among the political and social movements, Islamist movements, not only PAS, but also organizations like ABIM, Al-Arkam, more radical one, Jamaah Islamiyah during that time, 1980s, 1990s, about, not really ABIM though, about, to have a manifestation, to have an ideation of Islamic State, in Malaysia. So you see a lot of the increased use of language as well, such as jihad, anti-jahiliyah, anti-asabiyah, anti-secularism, anti-capitalism. Especially this one is, spoken by some of the past politicians during campaigns, in an attack against, especially UMNO, ruling party at the time. So the most important part of Islamic State, of course, for PAS, I think this was, very consistent. Even until today, although they're in government, Islamic State should have, hudud law. So, and then you can see that manifested in their political or legal reform in 1990s. Yep, here. So in Farish Noor's book, the quote from Farish Noor's book here, from 1982, PAS party came under the leadership of Ulama faction and subsequently transformed itself into more conservative, oppositional, at times even revolutionary party. However, it did not, PAS has not discarded internationalism, nor did it reject Malay Muslim ethno-nationalism. PAS politics in 1980s and 1990s would be marked by all three strains of Malay Muslim thought and also the party itself. So basically, of course, religion becomes more important in PAS, but then it doesn't mean that PAS has abandoned its, the ethno-religious centric approach here. So if and then it's also to part of the rivalry, political rivalry against UMNO at the time to get the Malay support, especially. All right. Very quick here. Other pervasive impacts of political Islam is that it's not just structural reform in past and also ideas of Islamic government and also Islamic state among the Islamist political parties, but then the most important thing here is that the spillover effect is has caused competing Islamization, especially between PAS and UMNO in 1980s. So what does it mean by competing Islamization is that it has resulted in actions and reactions of Islamizing the political and social domains from both sides. And then I will show you some of the examples later in what does it mean by competition of Islamization. I think everyone is familiar with this, how UMNO used to be, more Malay-oriented, Malay rights-oriented, ethnocentric party, but then it has become more and more religious as well throughout the decades because of this competing Islamization. So this process of competing Islamization is also influenced by internal and external factors in relation to the development of political Islam. So the competition between UMNO and PAS to Islamize policies, to Islamize the state, is not only between them, but also influenced by other external factors. Like you have more radical Islamist party in 1980s like Al-Arkam or also JI, who advocated for more, a stringent, more radical hardline approach to Islam. So they need to react to these things so that people would not succumb or embrace these radical ideas. And lastly, for UMNO as a ruling party, it was important to counterbalance past opposition based on religious narratives. So basically to water down radicalism, but at the same time for political gain. And also the competition of religious and ethno-nationalism between PAS and UMNO has changed throughout the years, not only in 1980s, but also 1990s and 2000s. Yep. So if you look at some of these primary sources, speeches from former prime ministers, right? UMNO's response in the late 1970s to the dilemma posed by PAS from Hussein on in 1970s, he said that we spend a lot of money on Islam because if we do not do that, basically PAS will get at us. So it's really about competition, to get this Malay support, to have legitimacy in the society. And also the same goes to Mahathir, that I will explain later to show some of the examples that he has done as a result of this competing Islamization. He said that UMNO should change from looking at only Malay rights. After independence, basically UMNO was supposed to fight for Malay rights, and also is not much on emphasis on Islam. But then, because of this new trend, new threat posed by PAS, they need to change their course to ensure that Malay community truly adheres to Islamic teaching. So it's really change. This is the point where UMNO has changed its path to invest more resources on Islamization. All right, so I think this is the second last slide before we go to discussion. So if you can see here, so this is what I've meant by competing Islamization. So PAS has its own brand of Islam, as an opposition party at the time, always challenged UMNO that for being not Islamic enough. UMNO was very UMNO politicians at the time, most of them are very relaxed, very Malay, not wearing casual or wearing suits, not like past where a lot of their politicians are very zuhud, wear Islamic garments to show their humility, to the people. So as a result of this competing Islamization in 1980s to 1990s, I would put there as a Mahathir and Anwar duo, is increasingly the trend of rapid bureaucratization of Islam at this time. So you see a lot the religious institutions, departments, and units in education and also in economy. You should. For you guys who are interested to read more about bureaucratization of Islam, Sisters in Islam did a forum where I moderated the session. Mazna Mohammed wrote a very good book on this. She wrote about the process of bureaucratization of Islam or religion in Malaysia. So here you see Mahathir and Anwar duo has introduced a lot of things, a lot of Islamic initiatives or departments. If you can see there, in under 4th Malaysia Plan 1981 to 1986, Malaysia government undertook measures to define what Islam ought to mean in the public domain. So they established unit Akidah, and ajaran sesat to determine which group is deviant and not. And also there's establishment of IUM at this in this period. And Kuala Lumpur become the host of international conference, technology, how Islamic thoughts and civilization, and so on and so forth. So really, under Mahathir and Anwar, really want to make Malaysia as a center of Islamic discourse to indirectly to counter past allegation, for not being Islamic enough. And then you see also in the economic sector where in this period, there was, there's a birth of Malaysian Islamic Bank open for the first time. And soon after, there's Takaful and then Tabung Haji. So this has become ingrained and also expanded in the government, in the bureaucracy. Islam has become internalized, Islam has become bureaucratized deeply in 1980s and 1990s. Also, you can see here in 1980s where the crucial period where you have this, UMNO and also PAS competition. There's a social division, and everyone knows this Mamali incident. Kafir or excommunication, against UMNO politicians has resulted in security forces shutting down these places, and then death of the prominent ustad, hiding from security forces at the time. So it's really marked the dark history of Malaysian society at the time. And then you have these two imams, UMNO and PAS, and then you have these separate social gatherings, really separated the people based on political identity. This is like identity politics that I've been talking about. And the legal reforms, especially in 1980s, 1990s, a lot of Sharia enactments have been upgraded and updated. In 1988, if I'm not mistaken, there was a constitutional amendment, 121(1)(a) happened during this period to separate the jurisdiction to have a clear separation of jurisdiction between civil court and also Sharia court, which doesn't really resolve the problem until today. And the most important thing is that the courage of Kelantan government in 1990s, where Kelantan government under PAS has reclaimed Kelantan in 1990s. And then they immediately introduced a lot of reforms in Kelantan. And one of the reforms is by introducing Kelantan Hudud Enactment in 1993. So basically, it's about the offences that laid down in this enactment is hudud punishment. So basically, zina punishment with whippings, and this really against the constitution itself, against the penal code. But then this particular enactment cannot be implemented because of the legal hurdle, especially from ultra vires, if it's a legal term that in legal community use, where it cannot be implemented because penal code should be the law of the land, the federal law. But still, with these reforms, PAS dismissed the efforts of Islamization of being cosmetic in nature. So it's just cosmetic. There's no spirit of Islam at all here. So really, as an opposition party, I think there's no surprise here. And then in the later period, you see the continuation of this Islamization projects, national Islamic projects happened during Patla, during Najib, and of course now during PN, Pakatan Harapan, that we can discuss a lot later. I'm running out of time here, but national Islamic projects are very important, in counterbalancing the radical views, especially in, like I said here before, external factor like 9/11 terror attack, Daesh in 2011. So really, the project continued over time. It's not just in the 1980s after the Iranian Revolution. All right, the last part here, I want to conclude what are some of the lessons that we can learn from political Islam. So political Islam, basically, I think it's adaptable and transform over time according to the local context and system. Adjusted well in democratic and economic system. So the inspiration from the Iranian Revolution, especially the doctrine of Wilayah Tulfake, PAS did not adopt that, literally, but then PAS adopt that and then adjust it with the local, democratic, the legal structure in Malaysia, where they cannot, as a political party, and then there was an opposition party, they cannot suddenly establish a supreme leader who can override prime minister. No, they cannot do that. But what they can do, at least at the minimum, is to adopt and then do some reforms in Kelantan, within their own political parties. All right. So it's adaptable. So if you can see also in the history of political Islam globally, if you see Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, how they have slowly embraced electoral elections, and also democracy. They speak about democracy. So political Islam is adaptable. But then the impacts are pervasive in society. As you can see, the reforms, the Islamization process has affected the society, political and legal and economic system. So it's not just about, having advocating for Islam ideas, Islamic State, but then changing the these domains, economy and also law. So, and the most important thing is that it does not stop, and one leads to another. If you read the Dr. Mazna Muhammad's book, the expansion of Islamization or bureaucratization project, if you see the budget for JAKIM, for example, or for this for Islamic affairs, have increased over time. So it has decreased, one time, but that's not a lot. So it keeps increasing, and also, for example, if we have before this we have RTM or IKIM as a media to propagate, Islamic teachings, but now we have TV Al Hijrah, for example, as an extra expansion of this project. And then it can pave ways to absolute power and authoritarianism. So if you see the Iranian model, the supreme leader is he's immune from everything. So there's no oversight. If also here in Malaysia, you see this institutions lacks of oversight from for example, audit of Jakim, for example. So it's not really out and open to the public. So it opens to abuse of power as well. If you have this, political Islam, because basically you use religion to cover up your abuse of power, for example, or your incompetency. And then the instrumentalization of deviance to strive for freedom of expression. Of course, this is an issue here as well. How if we have, how Ayatollah clamped down on political dissidents, especially the opposition, under the pretext of deviance. Here the same, to strive for freedom of expression, especially from the human rights group, and also some political movements on the basis of deviance. So people are silenced, they cannot speak about sensitive issues. So it's really leads to absolute power and authoritarianism. The last slide now is that I think political Islam is still at odds with real politics. What does it mean? Religion and politics are not enough to govern a country. If you can see in Iran, a lot of people are dissatisfied with the clerics because they cannot feed the people on the ground. So socio-economic issues are very important on the ground, especially now during COVID-19. How science and technology is very important. So you need political actors who invest more on science and technology, not on divisive narratives and also divisive policies. And if you can see the small bullets there, this is the most important thing, I guess. Why I think political Islam is not is still at odds or still cannot adapt with the reality, because especially in Malaysia, it cannot. We have multiracial and also multi-religious society, so race-based and religious based policies cannot meet the needs of the diverse population. Of course, we have this affirmative action, and also this funding of these institutions are coming from taxpayers' money, also from non-Muslims' taxpayers' money. So it causes dissatisfaction when you have incompetency, when you have divisive policies against the people. Malaysia is also affected by increasingly serious brain drain, not just Iran. Iran might be a radical example, but then Malaysia, one of the reasons by Stanford study is that the reasons is people migrated out of Malaysia, and these people are very educated and talented people because of race-based policies. So they're not satisfied with this, and then they think that they cannot actualize their talents and opportunities in their own country. So that's why they migrated to other countries. And of course, from gender perspective, political Islam is very male-dominated leadership. Male-dominated leadership, interpretation, policies do not sit well with women empowerment nowadays. So you cannot survive in politics where your party politics or your party policies prohibit women from taking the top roles, or from making important decisions. So it's not, the situation nowadays. It's not the reality. So if political Islam wants to survive, it needs to do something about this, and it should be more open about this thing. Majority youth reject race and religious-based politics and policies, according to 2018 survey recently. So it's now we see a lot of youth based parties, you know, show that the departure of politics from race-based and also religious-based party. So political Islam need to really rethink about their approach to youth. You know, of course, youth, you know, radicalization is also a problem, especially when it comes to Islamist ideology. But then this is also another reality that we need to look at. And lastly, free flow of information on social media, where in the past, in 1980s or in 1990s, you know, people can just use Islam as a tool to stifle freedom of expression, you know, and hide abuse of power, but not nowadays. People are open to more information, and they can check government if there's any, you know, incompetency. So I think that's all from me. I look forward to discussion. These are some of my references, and thank you very much for listening. Yes, yeah.
Thank you very much, Aizat. Excellent information given there in terms of both the Iranian Revolution as well as some historical aspects of our political situation here in Malaysia. As you were speaking, there's been a lot of comments made in the chat box, ranging from, you know, Mahathir to you know, units within PAS, JAKIM, and so on and so forth. But I don't really see any questions. Just to if I may start with the first question, or my takeaway from your discussion. I think, or at least how I view it, the main influence or impact that the Iranian Revolution had was not necessarily ongoing and long term. It was at that specific period of time where it gave especially the cleric, the ulamas, a new vision in terms of their role in government and politics, and you know, forming nation states. Because I think also what was apparent was that, I mean, within Iran there were many different, as you said, many different parties also looking at liberation against the monarchy, but there was an interview that I saw of a nationalist dissident who said that at that point in time, if you had asked any of the clerics, or if you had asked any of the nationalists whether they would put an imam as the head of state, everyone would say, you know, of course not. That could never happen. It's not within the possibility of putting a cleric, you know, right at the top of government. And that became a possibility when after the Iranian Revolution. And I suppose that really opened the eyes of a lot of Islamic parties in Malaysia, as well as, I suppose, across the world. I mean, please comment if you don't agree with that point of view. I would like to take the conversation to the current situation, if you could comment. You know, within your presentation, you have talked about UMNO a lot, and I think one major maybe turning point was the co-option of Anwar Ibrahim into UMNO in order to give UMNO perhaps a more Islamic credentials, right? And now the alliances have changed. What do you think has been the other influences? If you might look at the influences of Saudi Arabia, and I think you mentioned Muslim Brotherhood as well, and you know how this has shaped our politics today. And in relation to the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, I just wanted to also add on, sorry, it's a very long question, Aizat. I just wanted to add on, what are your views on why were we not as impacted by the Arab Spring? You know, considering I think the connections with Muslim Brotherhood is stronger, possibly. I don't know. This is what I've read. Yeah. So why is the impact post Arab Spring not as significant as it was post Iranian Revolution, or was it? So I think I'll stop there and let you answer my very long question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I cannot like explain. It's very you know, there's a lot of push and pull factors lah. How it shapes Malaysian politics nowadays today, and especially political Islam in Malaysia. But let me point out on Muslim Brotherhood and also Wahhabism. So I think, Sherry, you mentioned in your introduction how Saudi has also reacted to Iranian Revolution, right? So in 1980s, after the Iranian Revolution, and also in my slide presentation, I've mentioned that how Iranian has increasingly becoming a threat to Western allies, and including Saudi in the region, because of its revolution nature, because it's anti-monarchy, and it could be a threat to especially Gulf states, you know, including Saudi at the time, where the spillover of the revolution could ignite the anger of Saudis or people in the Gulf states at the time to rebel against the monarchy at the time. And let me quickly point out that after, I think, 1980s, in 1980s, what happened in Saudi is that the spillover actually happened. If you know, the siege of Kaaba by some of the radical groups. So what they did is they siege Kaaba and demanding that, and saying that you know, Saudi monarchs are evil, you know, they should rule the country by Islamic tenets, so on and so forth. So but then the radical groups have been you know, arrested at the end. So but then it marked the how Saudi you know, thought that this is a problem to their country, and also it's a global problem. If other countries would side with Iran instead of Saudi, so Saudi has Mecca and Medina, there's a they could leverage there on that point. But then Iranian Revolution spreads ideas, political ideas, where it resonates with people suffering. So what Saudi did is that, and it affected Malaysia as well, is the importation of Wahhabism through education, you know, giving scholarship to Malaysian students, and also in during Dr. Mazna's presentation in the book, is that how this training in Saudi universities have trained a lot of Malaysians, and these people, graduates, they came back and then they entered religious institutions, to join religious institution. And so you have this you know, more hardline approach toward Islam. And also about Muslim Brotherhood, right? So Muslim Brotherhood, So political Islam is I think for me is originated from Muslim Brotherhood, from Hassan al-Banna, you know, in Egypt at the time. How since 1920s, their ideas is to also to it's a resistant movement against secular regime, a secular nationalist regime at the time. So also oppressive against the people and also the opposition politicians. So so it's the main idea of political Islam, where they speak. They what they did is that they did a lot of welfare activities or welfare programs. Like they establish a hospital, they work with the people, they help the people. So this is how they garner support from the people to also support their political ideas, their Islamist political ideas. So in Malaysia, it's like organizations like ABIM and ISMA in the old times and other Islamist organizations are inspired from Muslim Brotherhood to advocate for Islamic ideas, not necessarily Islamic State, but it transcends into more lenient, for ABIM, for example. ABIM talk a lot about racial equality, Muslim Ummah still, but then they also speak about minorities' rights. So it influenced a lot, not only in Malaysian Islamist political parties, but also across the world. Yeah. So it's now, especially when you mentioned Arab Spring. So Arab Spring happened in 2000 and in 2000s, where it's led by Muslim Brotherhood most of the time in Egypt and also especially in Tunisia. And the best part about Arab Spring is that Muslim Brotherhood at the Ennahda party in Tunisia won the election, so against the secular dictator at the time. So so this marked the success of Muslim Brotherhood in Tunisia, but then it failed in Egypt later when Morsi was toppled by the military coup. Military coup. Yes. So, but then it doesn't really it doesn't really inspire Islamist political parties in Malaysia, because I think, it's not really unique to a lot of Malaysians already, because one is very Arab centric, kind of revolution. And number two is like, so number two is about like it only inspires Muslim Islamist political movements in Malaysia, among Islamist political movements in Malaysia. So it's not really go out of that circle of Islamist political movement. So we see solidarity of Anwar Ibrahim or ABIM or other Islamist party on behalf of Morsi, for example, when he won or he got persecuted later. But then it doesn't really give a wave of change in Malaysia, because it's Arab centric, and also it's and I think it's quite it's a period where Islamism has become an old idea already after Iranian Revolution. Yeah, and then it's and also it operates within that democratic system. So it's not really unique. It's nothing really unique about that when Muslim Brotherhood wants to fight for democracy. So it's not a fresh idea to a lot of Islamist political movement. So that's why I think it doesn't really affect Malaysia as a whole. But then the solidarity is there, but only among Islamist groups.
Okay, thank you, Aizat. We have a few questions in the chat group. If I can read it out to you, Aizat.
Yeah.
Good evening, Aizat from Halmi of Ideas. Does political Islam have a potential to veer into tendency towards violent extremism, in your view? Secondly, many scholars have argued that the Iranian Revolution has been a failure with its current trajectory as a low-income, underdeveloped state. Can you comment on this? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Halmi. Oh my God. So number one question.
Sorry, can I just add? Halmi added, just to qualify the second question, many have explored other experiments like the Tunisian experience or the Indonesian model. Yeah, so I suppose Iran and their revolution in comparison to what's happening in terms of in Tunisia and Indonesia.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah, so the first question is very, that's not a trick question. Or is it trick? Is it a trick question? So it's, so does political Islam could have, could veer a tendency towards violent extremism? Oh my God. Okay, so this is difficult part because radicalization can, manifest, happens not only because of ideology. So that's a fact. According to a lot of studies, there are pull and push factors of radicalization. So the pull factor is the ideology, but then the push factors are a lot. For example, when you have socioeconomic problem, you don't have a job, you are being sidelined in the society, so you become vulnerable and become more susceptible to violent extremism, to radicalization. And political Islam has diverse ideologies. You have Muslim Brotherhood, Iranian political Islam, Shia political Islam are different, and then you have ISIS, you have Jama'ah Islamiyah, you have Al-Qaeda, different. But then this political Islam is a tool to galvanize support, to recruit people in radicalization. So I would say, political Islam could have a potential to radicalize someone, but it depends on the spectrum of what political Islam we're talking about. So if it's
and Aizat, political Islam doesn't necessarily mean wanting an Islamic state as an end, as a fixed ideology. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes. But most of this Islamist political movement have the ambition to have an Islamic state. But then what makes political Islamist movement different? The spectrum of the ideology is diverse, and also their approach to policies. So maybe for Muslim Brotherhood, they used to put to have an Islamic state as a core ideology, as core manifesto in their movement. But then, because of the experience that they have gone through, political resistance, so on and so forth, now they said, no, Islamic state can be achieved later. But then, what need to be done is the welfare of the people, so on and so forth. So I think here is what I want to answer is that it depends on the spectrum of the political Islam that we're talking about. And if we're talking about Al-Qaeda and also ISIS, of course, these are violent terrorist groups. But I would like to point out some of the interpretations in political Islamist movement should be revisited, because it could give more. It could make people more, become more self-righteous, intolerant against minorities. So this should be revisited, so that it doesn't go, towards. It doesn't feel violent extremism. And then the question on Iranian Revolution has been a failure. Of course, it's a failure already. If you see at the the status quo that they're having in Iran right now is that one of the important aspects is that the criticism of the clergy government is that they invested a lot of their GDP on military, on wars, instead of education and instead of building the economic system. So it's very problematic, and there are a lot of resistance from the people already, from the Iranians. But then every time they speak out, they will be silenced. So if you heard of Green Revolution, these revolutions came after Iranian Revolution, marked the opposition of the people on the ground. Also, how Muslim women protested against the ban of the mandatory wear of hijab. Every year, I think people protested against this. So by investing more resources on military, of course, they become a failed state because they cannot prioritize their other priorities. And also, when we're talking about international politics, Iran has been facing a lot of sanctions from international community. So they cannot do trade freely. They cannot, grow their economy. So this is the repercussion from this Iranian Revolution. Yeah. Yeah, Tunisian XP. You on mute, Shareena. Okay, so the Tunisian experiment, I think, like I said before, it's not really famous. For those of you who are not familiar with Tunisian Revolution, how Ennahda Party, after they won the revolution, they ruled for a little while, and then they did a lot of reforms, including giving more rights to equality between men and women, so on and so forth. But then this experiment was, there was a discourse in Malaysia, I think, among at the time, among Penang Institute. I think IRF also talk about this. There's a discourse in Malaysia, but then not really for PAS or for UMNO, because these are really not popular. It's not radical like Iranian Revolution, But then also among ABIM, they also discuss about this to model after Tunisian revolution, Ennahda Muslim Brotherhood, to have more lenient form of Islam, to have more tolerant form of Islam. But then it's not really successful because there's no political will to push this.
Okay. Thanks, Aizat. Another question from Zoom. I'm taking the Zoom questions first, and then after that, I think we have a question from Facebook as well.
Yep. Okay.
From Zach. Hi, Aizat. Does Malaysia have any chance to really become secular in the near future? Very difficult questions for you, Aizat.
We have this question every time.
Problems.
Yeah.
What needs to be done to get our Malaysia back?
Yeah, instead of me explaining a lot, I don't want to impose my ideas. Let's hear from anyone from Zoom. You can raise your hand and then share your opinion. But then for me, I used to have this concern where Malaysia should become a secular state. Secular is a solution to Malaysia. But then over time, I think secularism is not an answer to Malaysia. Looking at socio-political situations that we're having right now, increase, identity politics, especially after PH government. So if you see in my last slide, the National Islamic Projects, and then it came, and then in 2010s, after Pakatan Harapan government, what I meant is that after Pakatan Harapan governments rule the country, and then they introduce reforms, right? Democratic reforms like, a smaller government, effective, but then effective, and then transparency, against corruption. But at the same time, they introduce reforms like in relation to human rights. For example, the intention to ratify Aizat and also Rome Statute. But then what happened after this introduction of reforms, we receive a lot of backlash from the people, especially from the Malay Muslim majority. But then these backlashes were driven by political parties like UMNO and also PAS, of course. So what happened is you see, about 50,000 people, rallied against Aizat. So this is very large rally that has been recorded in Malaysian history, so after PH government really gave trauma to a lot of Malay community and society about democratic ideas, democratization. So it's not about secular yet, so it is about democracy. So what I think is the parity that we need to set here, especially among young people, youth, human rights organizations, people who want better Malaysia, is that the priority should be about democratizing the country, and educating Malay, Muslim, and also non-Malay, non-Muslims, Chinese, other races in Malaysia about democracy. What does it mean to have equality, democracy, before you introduce this kind of policies that would shock people, to death. Yeah, unless you have, a radical movement like Tatuk or including Shah Pahlavi itself, like Sherry mentioned just now, the White Revolution, how secularization of the country as well. So unless we have that, or unless you want that, more brutal, then then I think it's going to be a long way.
I think you're quite right, Aizat. I think what we need to also take into account is that the rising of conservatism and fundamentalism in Islam is identity politics, but it emanated from more than just one issue. It's not just what's happening in the Middle East. It's not just the fact that our clerics are being educated there and bringing back in that kind of ideologies, but it's also what you mentioned in Iran, there is an anti-West, anti-colonial sentiment as well. You're finding your identity in this situation where there are so many pressures, with the uprising of China, and so many other issues are coming into play where many people are talking about what's our culture now. So many other pressures are coming down. And so there is that shift to Islam, because is probably a feeling of a safety net there. Aizat, let's go to a question from Facebook, from Fadlullah Wilmot. Could it be said that as a result of PAS becoming more extreme after the Iranian Revolution has resulted in changing the traditional tolerant approach to Islam in Malaysia to a much more rigid, intolerant, and xenophobic approach? Hasn't this forced UMNO to become more hardline? Did it lay the ground for the emergence of more radical groups among Muslims in Malaysia?
Yeah, so I mentioned before in my slide, competing Islamization, right? So what does it mean by competing Islamization? Is the actions and reactions of Islamizing political and social domains. So I think we really, in political science studies or in international politics, we cannot point one finger to say that, he or she or this party to be blamed. So it's more like a two-way or multi-way factors that led to hardline policies of Islam in Malaysia. Yeah, I mean that's my stance. I mean that's how I look at it.
I think, Aizat, if I may just add one development that I think really took a lot of us activists, at least in sister, I'm speaking on behalf of sisters in Islam, took us aback was when UMNO supported the Hudud Bill. And there was a shift there in terms of, you know, because UMNO was seen to be not a political party which had as its mission an Islamic state. That was PAS's mission, but at the same time, one of the machinations that PAS was using was the Hudud Bill. And so when UMNO supported it, yeah, it was a bit, it was very, I think that was when we realized that the political landscape is just shifting. And perhaps now this idea of, you know, Islam in politics is now, you know, sort of equally accepted by all political parties, at least Malay political parties. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah. So yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, during that event, how UMNO politicians in Kelantan also supported the bill and it didn't oppose the bill. I mean, that's a that shows us, you know, the changing landscape that we were going through throughout the time, and UMNO as a government, a ruling party at the time. But I think, I mean, specifically for PAS, and I will touch on UMNO later, but PAS, for example, PAS basically, it's, I mean, it's growing. It's a complex process of you know, Islamist position in the party. If you read the Farish Noor's book, you know, Farish Noor mentioned that Islam is adapting and also progressing at the same time, because they cannot appear as a hardline political party, you know, throughout the years. If you have this landscape of you know, 9/11, you have this landscape of Al Qaeda, so they cannot be, their ideas cannot be this, you know, cannot be seen as the same as these groups, because, you know, political strategy, because they want, because one, they want to avoid UMNO, you know, from pressing them. Number two, they want to gain more political support, especially from non-Muslim society or communities. You know, they have to be to adapt to this. But especially, you know, after Yusuf Rawa, I mean, he brought in a lot of Islamist ideas, pro-Islamic State, so on and so forth. But then at the end of his leadership, he brought in a lot of progressive faction as well. So it's so PAS is not only led by ulama, but towards the end of 1980s and 1990s, more progressive groups came in, professionals like you know, economists, engineers, you know, who can comment on policies, who can comment on what UMNO is doing as a government. So it's not just about calling a rhetoric allegations against UMNO, right? So that's what progress past a bit, you know, to have more lenient, or not lenient, but more diverse approach to politics, not just Islamists. And then what happened after 2000s, you know, this progressive, after Pakatan Rakyat, and then you know, during Pakatan Rakyat, you see PAS have to work with DAP. So I mean, it shows that, you know, it really shows how PAS you know, would like to change and then work with DAP, Communist Labour Party. And then after that, Pakatan, after during 2018 general election, PAS, the progressive faction in PAS, which is now called Amanah, withdrew from PAS and then formed a new party. So now PAS only consists of ulama who have more hardline approach. So they cannot within the party. There's no balance. There's no counterbalance to this idea, and then merge with UMNO again, and also Bersatu nowadays. So the homogeneity and also the comfort zone in this party would fill this Malay ethno-religious centric ideas, but at the same time they need to survive for the next election where they need non-Muslim votes as well. But I would say, to answer the question of Fadullah Wilmot, it's a two-way thing. It's a two-way approach, and this process of competing Islamization would not end unless we have non-race-based party, a change political lens, more political parties come up and then counter this rhetorics. Otherwise, it would worsen. From the trend 1990s, 2000s, we see it's worsened, and it becomes more hardline. It becomes more radical, more Malay-centric, ethno-religious centric.
Yeah. Thanks, Aizat. And perhaps first and foremost, we need to reconvene Parliament. Good.
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. It's 10 to 10 right now, and I don't see any new questions being posted. I just want to bring you to the attention of when Aizat was talking about bureaucratization of the Sharia system in Malaysia. I think he referred to a previous event that Sisters in Islam had organized. It's called Bedah Buku, The Divine Bureaucracy and Disenchantment of Social Life bersama Dr. Maznah Mahmud. And it's in the chat. The link is in the chat. But also very interesting that we also have a lot of recommendations for movies to watch, while we're in lockdown. So movies like Argo, Stoning of Soraya, and a few more also put in the chat there. So excellent, Aizat. Thank you very much. Are there any other, if not questions, any comments from the participants? Anything you want to just put your hand up, and I can, and I think they can unmute you.
Yeah, I think there's one comment, question here from Halmi again. Presidential election.
Yeah, but I think he mentioned that you inadvertently you've answered it already. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. A question, can we have the presentation slides? As I'm sure.
Yeah, of course, I will. I can share my slide. This comment from Hazman Baharum, very interesting. When PAS is in government, so it exposed a lot of things, especially the competency part of the party to actualize what they have propagated before. Like Islamic State, no alcohol, hudud, reforms, these radical demands and manifestos could not be materialized even when they are in government. And most importantly is they cannot, according to my observation at least, they cannot handle, especially the government in general, a lot of criticisms from intellectuals, from medical practitioners about how they cannot manage COVID-19 pandemic. We have been in lockdown for years, so it's really sad how we're managing this situation. So what I'm saying is that when PAS in government, it puts PAS on check. So they're no longer in opposition. They can say, UMNO is this, UMNO is that. PH is that, but then they have to be accountable to the public. And my last point exactly in the last slide, how social media is doing that, is providing a platform for Malaysians and also for people who are under difficult situation, under sufferings. Like Arab uprising happened because of Twitter. People speak about Arab uprising on Twitter. So the people in Malaysia, I've started to see conversations, recently, if you're hungry, if you don't have enough food supply, you should put your white flag in front of your house. I think that conversation is happening. So when we talk about Iranian Revolution, we also should reflect on our own realities now,
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And I think we've come up to 10 o'clock. I don't want to keep you for too long.
Sherry, we have poll coming up.
Sorry?
We have poll coming up.
Yeah. So just to close, thank you for all your so this is a feedback form. If you could fill it up to help us with our future events. In closing, I actually want to bring up a statement by Professor Abbas Milani, who is a professor on Iranian studies in Stanford University, where he says that the Iranian Revolution began as a call for democracy, and that revolution has not ended. And so it's an ongoing story, just like we're seeing in Malaysia, how the Islamism is changing over time. Within Iran today, there is still a strong, youthful, vibrant movement opposing the autocratic Islamic regime, rebuking the so-called divine rights of the Imam to rule as a divine right. And importantly, he says that more than anyone else, the force behind this has been the women of Iran. And to quote him, in spite of efforts of the clergy to force a more traditional role on women, women are making a revolution of their own. Within that revolution, Iranian women are helping Iran become what this revolution was initially meant to create, a democratic Iran where there is pluralism, where there is acceptance for diversity, where there is equality between religions and equality between genders. So let's look forward to the future. Perhaps Iran has more things to show us in the future. Thank you for filling up the feedback form on behalf of Sisters in Islam. Good night. Wassalamualaikum, and thank you very much. Thank you, Aizat. Good night.
Thank you, sis.